welcome back to PopScream, excuse me, our day of Halloween and horror fun. Hopefully you were able to catch some of our panels earlier in the day where we talked to the horror comics creators from Scout Comics and got to watch some of the highlights from this year's LitCon. But now we are here with first my co-host, Maddie Slay,
What's up?
and author Stephen Graham Jones, who is here to explore the ins and outs of writing horror and all of the spooky elements that go with that. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you for having me. Stephen, even in the whole pre-show, as we were just like chatting for 15 minutes, you kept that hand hidden from us the whole time. That was awesome.
So we're ready to talk all things scary, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I have, Stephen, your bio. So I just want to give our audience an intro. Correct me if I get it wrong or if I miss anything, because you're writing, you've written so much. So Stephen is an author and professor from the University of Colorado Boulder. But that just, as I said, really scratches the tip of the iceberg. Stephen, you've written over 20 books. Is that correct? Not including short stories?
Yeah, I mean, I've probably written 45 books, but I've got between 25 and 30 published.
Okay. And not just one genre, correct? Multiple horror, experimental, sci-fi. And if that's not enough, you're also a tenured professor and you've won multiple academic and literary awards.
Yeah, I've been lucky. Yeah.
So you're really, you're not busy, are you? You just, kind of not a lot going on.
Yeah, this is like, I think this is one of 6 events I have today. So.
Oh my gosh.
Because you're being honored later today, correct?
Yeah, I'm doing I'm one of the guests of honor at World Fantasy. So right when this goes over, I'm doing it again over for them. Yeah.
Jumping over there. One of the benefits of virtual content is you can be a lot of places.
Yeah,
I was just say, or we could just record this one and send it to them and save you the work, right?
That works.
Yeah.
So what we want to do today is really just have a conversation about, Stephen, your experiences writing horror, what it means to really delve into that genre and how you got started. So I think really just a good place to start is, where did your journey as an author begin?
In 4th grade, I was going to my little 2A elementary in the pastures of West Texas, and I checked out a book 3 times in a row. It was Where the Red Fern Grows by Wilson Rawls. Do y'all know that book?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it'll break your heart like 6
make
times.
you sob. Ugly.
Yeah. As a native Texan, what part of Texas?
West Texas, about 20 miles east of Midland.
Okay, I'm familiar. Yep.
We didn't have a post office or anything. We just had like a school and a church on the same grounds. So you'd kick the ball over the fence and it'd go into the graveyard, that kind of thing.
I went to a prom at a 2A high school once, and so I
But I had to check out Where the Red Fern Grows 3 times to read it in 4th grade, and I distinctly remember sitting in the classroom because we couldn't take the books home because we weren't trusted, and I remember reading that last paragraph where there's an axe head stuck in a tree and a lantern hanging on it for like a decade or 20 years, and everything's all rusted. And I remember holding that book closed and thinking, I can do that. I can hang a lantern on an axe head and walk away for a lot of years, And so from that time, I knew that I could get lucky with endings, I guess, because I think that's what storytelling kind of is. It's doing the punchline at the end, but I never had any aspirations to be a writer. Growing up where I did in West Texas, you only had 2 avenues. One was the oil field and one was the cotton field, and I'd seen a lot of people coming back from the oil field missing fingers and stuff, and I thought, maybe I'll just drive tractor instead. So my plan was to graduate high school and lease a tractor and plow for other people because I'd never have my own land, and I figured I would read and write in the evenings if I had time. But then this is getting to be a long answer. Hopefully y'all just like raise a flag if it gets too long.
You are our guest. Talk as long as you want.
But then when I turned 18, I didn't graduate high school like in a real way. I got kicked out of a lot of schools. But anyways, I ended up with a diploma through various underhanded means, I guess. And my mom took me out to eat for a celebration, and she gave me 2 things. She gave me a suitcase. She said, you need to get out of town because this town is you're not gonna make it long here, and she gave me this, I have it right here, this little brass apple that I figured she had gotten at a clearance rack somewhere. And also she told me she had saved up enough for me to go to 1 semester of college. And I had taken my SATs not because I had plans in life, but because there was a girl taking the SATs who didn't have a car, and I knew that if I happened to be signed up for the same test session, I could give her a ride, and so that was my big plan to get a date with her, and it worked. We went out for like 6 weeks. It was great, and
That's thinking smart.
yeah, it was. And all I had to do was take a test, and I've always been lucky with tests. But I did good enough on the test that I was able to get into a college, and so I went to my undergrad, my first semester of undergrad, and I'm sitting in a classroom, and everybody in that classroom, like the 18 or 20 of us, was talking about what they'd read like it mattered. And I had never been in an environment like that where books mattered. I was always made
Mhm.
fun of for reading and stuff. Like, what are you gonna do? You need to be moving that pipe. You don't need to be reading that book. And I mean, not that my family was mean to me or nothing, but it's just books weren't valued,
Right.
very much. And so then I was hooked. I was like, this is a whole different world that I did not know existed. So I got a lot of jobs, took out a lot of loans, and made my way through all the way to doctorate. But as for your question, where did writing start for me? It started when I was sitting in the back of a World Lit II big lecture with 300 people. This is my second semester of college, I guess. And all I've got with me is my spiral notebook and my pen, and I'm just kicked back taking notes or pretending to take notes. And a couple of police officers walk in, and it's dark in the back of the auditorium. They take their sunglasses off and they're looking around, and I just sink lower and lower in my seat because every time cops come in the room, they're always there for me. That's one thing I learned by the time I was 18. And sure enough, they recognize me and they pull me out. And I go out in the lobby with them, and I don't start confessing or making up alibis because that always gets you caught. So I just waited for them to tell me what was up. And what was up was one of my uncles had been burned terribly. They didn't expect him to live, and I was the only family they could find. And the town I was in had the best burn unit in the region, so they had airlifted him there. And so they took me to the burn unit ICU, and I sat there for 3 days and 3 nights waiting for him to live or die. And all I had was that pen and that spiral, and I got bored and just wrote a story for kicks and grins. When I came back to my composition course on Monday, I had not done my personal essay I was supposed to do. So I tore those pages out of my spiral and handed them to my teacher and said, I did something anyway. Maybe I'll get half credit. And she read it, which she didn't have to do. And she liked it, which was, a surprise. And she liked it enough to give it to someone on the creative writing faculty who typed it up and entered it into a contest, which I won. And I got $150. And that was like bells going off in my head. I'm like, you can make money for telling lies? I had no
Oh my
idea.
gosh.
So I've just been doing that ever since.
That's like it's cool to hear how all those what you would think are disconnected pieces like connect back and lead you to where you are. That always is fascinating to me with people.
Oh, I should show you too if I can get it out here. That little apple my mom gave me.
Wow.
She gave it to me when I was 18 and stupid and all kinds of trouble. But it says teacher on this little part here. It has teacher
Mhm.
stamped. Like she knew somehow that I had it in me to be a teacher, which that's the way moms are, I guess.
Well, and I think first, thank you for
Mhm.
going so far back. But I think that's so amazing when we see the things that we encounter as children
Mhm.
and those kind of those disconnected moments that it's not until you look back that you see how all of them come together.
Mhm.
And I think for so many kids, that time that they read that first book that really resonates with them, the impact that it has and that the impact that it can then have as you grow into adulthood. That's
Yeah, for sure. And it's wonderful now to be on the other end of that a little bit. I mean, what if there's always a minuscule chance that one of my books might touch someone else like that?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And also having the opportunity teaching, correct?
Yeah.
To get to work with students in those same.
It really is wonderful. I'll have students in my comic book classroom, and then the next semester I see them working here at Time Warp in Boulder, and
Ah.
and they tell me they're saving up money to go to Portland to be at the heart of the comics industry. It's really exciting to be part of that.
That's so rad. And as an author, you're a type of teacher as well, right? You are giving your words and, in a sense, thoughts and ideas to readers. And so it's a less direct way of teaching, but you're definitely spreading some sort of like philosophy and knowledge there too.
It is, yeah. You really can't help but encode yourself into your art. And yeah.
Well, then how, looking at where you started with that
Mhm.
first story that won, how did you then get to the point where is 2000, correct, when your first book was published?
Yeah, it is, yeah. That first book, what happened was First, I didn't ever plan to go to grad school, but my professors at undergrad level said you've got to give it a try. I didn't even know about grad school, you know, and then
Isn't it amazing how those professors that talk to you in your undergrad can propel you to keep going further when you never would have done it on your
Yeah.
own?
I never would have. I just thought this was a 4-year delay. Now it's time to go home and start farming, you know. But I mean, I was a philosophy major, and what are you gonna do? What was I gonna do with philosophy at the undergrad level? You know, there's not a whole lot of options. Um, which isn't to denigrate philosophy. Philosophy is a wonderful discipline. You know, it teaches you the rigor you need to interact with the world, I think. But
Mm.
I put out two sets of applications. I put out two applications only for grad school, one to philosophy and one to fiction. And the fiction people got back first, and they said, "Hey, come here. We'll pay you some money, and you can basically get through here without it costing too much." You know.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So I did that, and then that turned into a PhD. I did the PhD in 2 years, which was the record at FSU. You know,
Holy cow.
and and also I was the first tribal member to graduate there with a graduate degree in 33 years, and evidently I must have checked some box that I was going to be at graduation because I wasn't at graduation. I was in Arkansas for graduation, not Tallahassee, Florida. But they had a big moment planned in the ceremony where they had some dignitaries from the Seminole come up to stage, and they had like regalia. They had stuff all set for me to walk up on stage, and then I wasn't there. You know, it was a bummer. But
You guys are inspiring me. I mean, now it's 2 PhDs here, and I got my master's, but like maybe I need to go get my PhD.
But as for where that first novel kind of happened, what happened? FSU, the writing program, used to do a thing called Writers Harvest. They may still do it, where they bring in agents and editors and authors for like a 2-week party, you know, talks and everything. And I'm at one of those receptions with my dissertation director, Janet Burroway, and I'm talking with her and her editor, Janet Silver, up at one of the big, I think it was like Big Seven then, up in New York, publishers. And Janet Burroway does what mentors do. She says, "I'm going to leave y'all two to talk. I'm going to go over here," you know. And so there I am in the headlights of this high-powered New York editor, and I have this like out-of-body experience where I hear myself telling her all about this novel, and it's like a 3 or 5 minute pitch. And at the end of it, she says, "You know, that sounds like exactly what we need at my house. Can you please send it to me on Monday?" Because this was a Friday. And I said, "You know, I need to make one more pass across this novel, and then I'll get it on your desk." And she was like, "All right, here's my email," or whatever it was. And so then I went home like at 3 that morning, and I started that novel, you know.
I was about to ask, had it been written yet?
It hadn't been written. So I wrote it really quickly, and
Now, really quickly, what was really quickly?
really quickly for me then was 10 months, which was not what she was looking for the end of the week, you know.
Right.
But now it takes me about probably, I don't know, 6 weeks or 2 months to write a novel. But back then I had no idea what I was doing. I had no
Mhm.
idea how to conceptualize 350 pages, you know. Every time, like what a novel is you run 10 or 12 pages and you hit a wall, and
Mhm.
you know what to do. And nowadays what you do is you go around on social media and you cast about tragically, like, oh, the life of a writer, you know. But back then I had to get that manuscript on Janet Silver's desk. So every time I hit that wall, I just reached in my head and put a piece of my life down the page and changed the names. And so that first novel to me is weirdly autobiographical, but because that method helped me get across the requisite number of pages, that conditioned me to think that is how you write a novel. So every novel I've written since then is always just pieces of me on the page with the names changed, you know, which always feels weird to me. Like I'm going to a party and giving everybody my heart on a plate, you know, like
Mhm.
what you will. But I think that's what writing is at the same time. But that novel, it was my dissertation. And for a dissertation, you have to have your committee. And I don't know, I had whatever number of people it was, 4 people. But then 2 weeks before the defense, one of them had a family emergency and had to jet. And that
Ooh.
left me without enough people.
Uh-huh.
I couldn't get I couldn't pass my test, you know, if my orals, if he wasn't there. So I went to a Gertrude Stein teacher I'd had because we'd had a good experience. And I said, "Hey man, I know you don't do this kind of stuff, but I'm going to give you my manuscript. And if you could just please come to my defense, and you don't have to vote yes, vote no if you want. Maybe enough people will vote yes. It doesn't matter. I just need a body in that chair. That's all I need." And he said, "I can do that." And so I came to my defense, and he came in with the manuscript. It was a big old thing, and it was tabbed and folded and marked all over. And I'm like, "Dadgum, he read this thing." I can't. um, and then I had no idea. It turns out he was the head publisher of FC2, which is a really respected, innovative press, been around since '74, I guess. I had no idea that's who he was. And instead of asking me questions, he said, "Can I publish this?" Um,
Wow.
and I said, "Hey, thanks, but I'm going to go to New York and be Thomas Pynchon," you know, and which was probably not the right thing to say. And at the time, one of my friends had just sold. He had a pretty black Ford. He had sold it for cash to go to New York to try to make it as a writer, and he was up there working as a custodian in Manhattan. So he had keys to all the offices, and I printed up a lot of copies of the novel and sent them to him, and he snuck into the agents' offices and stole their letterhead, and he would fake letters on their letterhead, and I pinned it to my novel and leave it on the desks of editors, and mess with the address so the replies would come to him, and we did that all to all the big editors, like this had made it up this stream to them, and I got roundly rejected. Nobody wanted it, and so I came back to that professor, that Gertrude Stein professor, Ralph Berry, and I said, "You still want to publish this?" And he said, "I do." And so that's how it happened.
Man.
Wow. I think in our last panel, we were talking to Scout comics creators, and one of the things that they talked about, and if you want to be a creative, you want that to be your career fields, to just keep doing it, to
Yeah,
start creating, start writing, start drawing, and get it out there. And I think that right there is a testament to that, that if you can get it on paper,
yeah.
that's the first step.
You know
Well,
what?
and then the other thing was that like it seemed like all this writing you did for you. You didn't do
Mhm.
it to please somebody else. You did it for you, and then you found the right outlet
Yeah,
to put that out into the world.
yeah,
Well,
for sure.
and the level of vulnerability, just thinking about even in just the dissertation process, to take yourself in an environment where you're already going to be critiqued
Mhm.
and add the potential for a critique directly at you, that's
Yeah,
incredible.
Neil Gaiman. What's he say? He says that he never really started writing good stuff until he realized he had to be vulnerable on the page,
Mm.
and I
Mhm.
do think that that's largely what it's about. But when I first started writing, like this is in the '90s, I had this this dream, this fantasy that that talent rises. That if you just write good stuff, then somebody is going to recognize you and lift you up and put you on a pedestal.
Mm.
But I've been at this for 20 years now, 25, I guess, and I've seen a lot of people come and go, and what I've finally realized is it's not solely about talent. It's about who can keep getting up after they're knocked down.
Mhm.
Like who can be Rocky. Who is too stupid to lay down. Who's going to stand up when the whole crowd is telling them not to stand up. That those are the people who actually make it.
It's the grit and spit factor.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
Well, one thing before I ask my next question that I forgot to mention at the beginning of our stream is that if you're watching live, include your questions, type them into the comments. We're going to be collecting them. Matt is following to make sure that we don't miss any, and we will ask those questions at the end or towards the latter half of the session. So if you have questions, keep them coming.
Hmm.
With kind of the shift to horror, how do you see horror, Stephen, differing from other genres that you've written in or that you've experienced?
I mean, every genre has the ability to pull a feeling or a thought or challenge someone, but in my experience, and this could just be a result of my own tastes, of course, but I think what horror does that other genres maybe don't do as well is it provokes a visceral response that the reader is
Mhm.
not necessarily willing to give. It can either make you like physically ill. It can like the stuff happening on the page can be so morally reprehensible that you feel complicit for having paid $3 to read this. Like you're reading
Mm-hmm.
into that, that kind of stuff. Or
Mhm.
it can you can think you can be reading and see the prose version of zippers on the suits, like a bad comma or a poorly done sentence or a bad chapter ending, whatever it is. And you'll think, yeah, that novel didn't get to me. It wasn't crafted well. Then at 3 in the morning, you're going for a glass of water down your dark hall, and the egg that horror story laid in your head hatches.
Mm.
And,
Yeah.
Mm.
and you're telling yourself not to run, but you're maybe going to run.
I felt that, so I'm listening to the audiobook of The Only Good Indians right now. Not very far. I think I'm like 4 hours in, and when we start talking about the dog, dogs are a connection point for so many people, but when we started talking about that, I had to like look at mine and be like, it's okay, everything's fine.
Yeah, yeah. I've got one of my dogs is right here. He's a 15-year-old Great Dane. They don't live that long
Oh,
either, man. Yeah,
Ooh.
yeah.
yeah.
I think one of the things that struck me, I'm reading Mongrels right now, is the way that you're able to, even in times that things are morally gray or you're getting into the more, horrifying aspects of humanity, that you keep your narrator relatable.
Mm.
How does that work kind of in that horror, in blending the two, that you are creating those emotions and reactions from people, but you still keep those pieces human?
I think it's that Stephen King trick where he says the horror machinations are great, but you've got to have a real person to feed into that meat grinder, and
Mm,
and if I am lucky enough to create real people on the page, it's because I'm cheating, because I'm putting myself on the page. Like with Mongrels, that kid in there, the sometimes narrator, or the narrator, I guess, the young boy. That's my life growing up. Growing up, I lived all over Texas, and it seemed like every few months we'd throw all our stuff into trash bags and put it in a horse trailer and go to the next town. And so him and his werewolf family doing that is just me, kind of making my own childhood more exciting with these horror creatures, and like in the Only Good Indians, Lewis, that part that you're on, Matt,
mhm,
that's basically me, that he
mm,
starts out up on that ladder, change
mhm,
that light bulb. That is directly from a house my wife and I moved into about 3 years ago. They had that same light bulb, that same ceiling, and
mm.
I was up on that same ladder, and like an idiot, I'm not a home repairman. The fan was still on, so it was almost hitting me. So I'm having to reach around and it was all stupid. And so I just put myself on the page and try to put enough of a mask on that people aren't like, "That's you," but I know it's me.
Mhm.
Well, one thing we talked about in our first panel today, where we had the presentation about the Hulk, is we talked about normal and abnormal, and how everything
Mhm.
kind of outside of what we conceive to be normal is usually what scares us. So that is what has the potential to scare us. And one of the things that I like about listening to The Only Good Indians right now is that Lewis is very much going through, not to spoil anything, but a mental struggle,
Mhm,
right? He is
Mhm.
very much going through, like, what is real?
mhm,
What do I know to be true that is not true?
mhm.
And that's terrifying.
Yeah.
And everyone can kind of relate to that experience where they've had to second guess something, or, they saw something that wasn't actually there. And okay, am I okay? What am I the crazy one? Is this stuff really happening? And that is truly terrifying.
Oh, yeah, uncertainty is one of the base things that you use in horror for sure. And
Mhm.
I guess, really these last few years in the world, uncertainty has been what the world we live in, like everybody saying fake news or social media produced viral stuff that is supposed to influence us. We don't know what to trust anymore.
Mhm.
And so it's weird that the techniques of horror have leaked out into the real world even more.
Well, I don't. Some of the perspectives we're coming with today are surprising, and I don't like them. But I think you're right there that some of that has come out, and that's how the forces that be try to keep control, is through terror, and convincing people that you should be scared.
Yep.
Well, and I think going back to what you said earlier, Stephen, about how things crop up
Mhm,
later on,
mhm,
I'm never going to look at pantyhose or tights ever the same way ever again. And I actually this morning and going through, it occurred to me kind of randomly, and I think that's such an amazing component of these types of stories because they are so relatable. There are things that they connect, even, outside of the supernatural, they connect and resonate with you. So they crop up and you go, I guess I'll never wear tights ever again because that imagery is stuck with me for a while now. So if anyone watching hasn't read Mongrel, read it just to know why to worry about tights.
It's kind of it's the same way. I mean, that dynamic you're talking about is wonderful, and thank you very much for smuggling that out to the world in your head. In 1960, Hitchcock did that for us with showers. He spooked the shower up forever, and the shower is never a safe space anymore.
That's
I like on your website, one of the first things that pops up is a story, six-sided after hunters fire into elk herd. And your comment is, well, if they'd read The Only Good Indians, they would know that's not a good idea. And yeah, I won't think of elk the same way for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that the kind of iconography, I hadn't even thought about that with the way things change. So Hitchcock changed showers.
Mhm.
Stephen King changed everything
Clowns.
from balloons to clowns to cats in the street. I mean, that type of imagery that it comes up. I actually was on a walk recently with a friend and a cat walked by and they started talking about Church from Pet Cemetery. And it just launched this whole conversation around, what scares us. So those types of things resonate so well.
They do, yeah. Stephen King, I think he wanted toilets to be his psycho shower from his novel Dreamcatcher, I guess, if y'all know that one.
Mm-hmm. Again, it's those things that scare you in the middle of the night when you see them out of the corner of your eye.
Exactly.
With that, kind of looking at your career and so many books, where are you drawing inspiration from now, either for horror or the other genres? Where are you finding that at?
We know a lot of it comes from you, but like where else does it come from? Yeah.
Yeah. That's always the question. I know. And I think inspiration is always like, for me, everything is fuel, like standing in line at Burger King, waiting for my Whopper. I'll hear somebody say something and 3 booths over and I'll mishear what they said. Like, the snake is in the toolbox. And I know that's not what they're talking about, but that'll lodge itself in my head anyways. And I'll start having to build out in concentric rings from that. Why would a snake be in a toolbox? And then maybe the snake is, from maybe that's a space snake, and these people are trapping it, and maybe they're part of an organization that catches aliens like Men in Black or something. And you just get you bigger and bigger like that. That's if I have inspiration, that's where it's from. But I just consider it fuel, really. I don't really feel. I think I never feel inspired. I just feel compelled. I feel like if I'm not writing, then I'm wasting air. I'm stealing air, really. Because I think writing is the one thing in the world that I think I can do, maybe not better than anybody, but I can keep up anyways. And like I can't work on an engine to save my life. I'm not really good at scooping snow. I don't care about my lawn. My roof was leaking. I had to call people because I can't fix that, but I can sit here at the keyboard and do stuff, that's what I'm here for, I think. So when I'm not doing that, I feel like I'm just wasting away.
What you just described with the snake actually sounds really similar to some of the workshops and activities that we do with some of our students. So at Pop Culture Classroom, we're always having people come in and where we have professionals teaching workshops. And one of the ones we do is a world building exercise, and where we take these, small ideas and kind of build upon them to build a world. And one of the things that we do in that is that, there's no bad ideas. You just throw random what and see what works. Is that when you write, is that kind of how you do it, or do you already kind of have like a through line for a book figured out?
No, I never have it figured out. I just write one sentence and that turns into 2 sentences, and it's a paragraph and a section and a chapter and a part and a novel. Like the Only Good Indians say, when I started writing that, I just was putting the guy up on a ladder to see what would happen. I thought maybe it'll be a story, and then it turned into a novella. And then at the end of that novella, I realized I can do one of 2 lines. One line caps it off, and one line opens it up into a novel. So I texted my agent and I said, "Hey, I just wrote this. Do you want it to be a novella or a novel?" And she texted back like with ellipses, and she said, "Go ahead and do it a novel. I can tell a novel easier." So I turned it into a novel. But Mongrel,
that's good trust from your publisher too.
Yeah, it is. My Mongrels, I had no idea I was writing a novel. I was just writing some werewolf stories, and I did it in like 2 weeks. And I after like 3 or 4 days of just writing werewolf stories, I realized, wait, what if these were the same characters? And so then I started like line them up, and I realized this can be a novel. And so like the first week I was just writing the story, and the second week I was making a novel, but I had no idea what I was doing.
So it surprises even you, like where these go. Yeah.
So I'm a fangirl for a minute, so I just apologize to all of our watchers. I think that's amazing though, because in Mongrels you get these stories, and the way that they move around and the perspective changes as the boy changes. It should be chaotic. It should be difficult for the author, or excuse me, the reader to follow, but it's not. You feel like you're growing with the character, and as his perspective changes, your perspective changes, and so that's spectacular. And just knowing kind of the background behind it makes that even more poignant, how those stories all work together to create that.
Although I should say, I say I did it in 2 weeks. That's a little bit of a lie, because one of the stories I'd written in October before the January when I wrote this, and then one of the chapters I wrote in the summer following that January 2-week writing period, because my new agent read it, and she said, "Yeah, this is fun. I can sell it, but she said, I need to have a chapter where we see this boy interacting with his peers. And I said, were you not there for that scene in front of the gas station where he talks to some people his age? And she said, yeah, that's like 600 words. Give me a chapter. And
Mm.
I was like, good grief, I guess I have to do this if I wanted to sell it. So I wrote the chapter, and it turned out to be the Brittany chapter.
Mm.
It's called Layla in the hardcover, Mouth Breathers in the paperback. And to me, that's the beating heart of the novel. You know, without the boy in the classroom falling in love and pretending to be a werewolf and all that stuff, then I don't think the novel works. But I didn't think of that myself. My agent thought of it for me, you know?
So I'm going to ask a bit of an abstract question, and I apologize for the abstractness here. But Tasia and I are both educators. You're an educator, and the classes that you teach are creative writing, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So how does your experience as an author, your experience of creating for so long, how does that influence how you teach your class and kind of how you guide your students through a semester?
You know, well, as far as guiding them, my advanced students at the undergraduate level, I make them write a novel over the course of the semester, and that's their background. That's their background project. They have to turn in stories and do all this other stuff along the way. But they had the pass fail for the whole class is you either give me a novel at the end of the semester or you don't pass. You know?
Wow.
Yeah. So they're under.
Syllabus would have terrified me the first day of class. Just absolute. We're talking about scary stories. That syllabus reading that is a scary story.
But you know, teaching for me, teaching writing anyways, I hear myself articulating like principles or techniques or tips and tricks. That's basically what I've got in the classroom. And then after the class is over and I'm working on my own stuff, I realize that I now have to follow my own precepts, you know,
Mm.
either follow them or undercut them in a way which I can then share to my students and tell them something different, you know. But I think teaching has made me a better writer because it makes me think through things in a way I never would have been challenged to think through them.
I know I have that same experience that there's so many things that we do and we're just like, I just do it.
Mhm.
And then when you break it down so that you could actually
Mhm.
teach someone else how to do it,
Yeah.
we're about to do a boot camp on streaming. So go check out popcultureclassroom.com/camps. Excuse me, .org/camps. But we're doing a boot camp on like how to be
Shameless plug from Matt.
hey, look, it's what we do. About streaming and content creation. And you know, I'm like, I just make it happen. And so now think about how to communicate those steps and it makes you look at it in a different way for sure.
Yeah, it does. It really does. And you know, I worry that if I stop teaching, I'm gonna become untethered from the world and just float away and just listen to my Bob Seger and watch my Three's Company. And that's not really. I mean, that's a happy place for me, but it's not a place that makes me engaged with people. You know?
Right. Yeah.
That needs to be more of a retreat than
Yeah,
an all the time
yeah, yeah,
occurrence.
yeah. But without my students telling me stuff like I was talking to y'all before this about like Adele, like I'll never know, you know, because I'll just sit and be happy, you know.
Do you see, looking at it again from an educational standpoint, do you see, the other faculty around you or other disciplines picking up your work and using it in different ways?
Yeah, both The Only Good Indians, Mongrels, Map and Interior, and Leadfeather. Those are probably the four of my books that get taught the
Mhm.
most. And I'm always visiting classrooms and doing Q&As with classes who have read it. Or sometimes one of the books will be like the university read for a whole campus, and
Mhm.
that's always a good time too. Yeah,
That's awesome. You got a built-in audience there.
yeah, yeah. It's nice. It's wonderful.
So, kind of looking back at the genre overall, when I told someone I was reading a book about werewolves, they had a very different idea of what werewolves were. And this happens to be a straight female friend that I have, and she took it in a very different direction with Twilight inspired werewolves and overt sexiness. How do you see not only Mongrels, but your other books kind of subverting some of those expectations on what the genre looks like and giving something new?
You know, with Mongrels, I wanted to do what I would consider real werewolf, which is werewolves I
Mhm.
believe in, you know. And for
Mhm.
me to believe in a werewolf, it has to make like physical sense. Like the werewolf, a 140-pound woman can't transform into a 390-pound werewolf. That doesn't really track for me, you know. Where does all when she comes back, is there just like a big glob of fat and hair over here left over? I mean, I don't know. It doesn't make sense. And so I had to adhere to conservation of mass, and Also, I had to take into account werewolf culture because over the eons, there would be a culture that develops, of course.
Mhm.
And it's the same thing with the only good Indians. I'm talking about Indian people, but I want to do real Indian people, like people I know, my family, and to do that, I have to come at the existing stereotypes and cliches.
Mhm.
So I don't like have a checkbox like I'm going to take down mascots. I'm going to take down this litter Indian who cries in the river about litter in the river and all. And I don't have a checkbox, but in order to get real people onto the page, I do have to take out those stereotypes at the knees sometimes if I
But
can.
I like how Lewis talks about the headlines in his head.
Mhm.
Like he's always got the headlines
Yeah,
formulating in his head, and
yeah,
that's a fun way to address that.
yeah, yeah. That's what he was. Yeah, he and the other characters in the Elegant Indians, they're constantly wrestling with what does it mean to be a good Indian in 2020. You know,
Mm.
and does that mean adhering to traditional ways? Does it mean adopting so-called new ways? How do you measure success when success in one field is betrayal in another field? So all the characters in here are dealing with what does it mean to be a good Indian. But if I can have a thesis, which I never actually say in the novel, but hopefully the reader gets it, it'd be that there's not one way to be a good Indian. There's 7 million different ways to be a good Indian. Because that's how many of us there are.
And speaking of the horror aspect, yeah, when you talked about the werewolf and the conservation of mass, it's almost like your willing suspension of disbelief
Mhm.
can only
Mhm.
go so far,
Yeah.
right? And in horror, the closer you can keep that to reality, the more terrifying it is.
Exactly. Yeah. If you can infest the reader's world with your monsters, then you're 90% of the way there.
When I'm watching a horror movie, as soon as I see the overt, obvious CG,
Huh.
I'm like,
Mhm.
I'm completely taken out, and it doesn't
Yeah.
scare me anymore.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah.
that's kind of why, you remember in the X Files, Fox Mulder is always running around with a piece of evidence that if he can just get it to the journalist, then the whole world will change. But he never can get it to the Washington Post or wherever,
Mm.
because once he does, that calves the X Files world off into a different space than ours. And then he's no longer talking about conspiracies and truth in our world. He's talking about it in his world. And in order to keep it our world, that tape can never get to the newspaper people.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Well, and I think that unknown, I know Jaws isn't technically a horror movie, but that first scene when you first watch it, the unknown of what's under the water, and you can see the impact of the unknown. You
Yep.
see what's happening to
Mm.
the girl, you hear it, you get all of those other, sensory
Mhm.
indications that something is there. But you don't see it. And as a child watching that for the first time, that movie terrified me in a way that a lot of quote unquote horror movies don't. And I think it is that, you get as close as you can, but don't show it.
Mhm.
You are able to develop that
You
fear factor.
definitely are, and it's neat that you talk about watching it as a kid because I'm guessing you watched it on like DVD or a TV
Mhm.
version or something. Because I would guess the audience in the mid '70s who were watching that had seen the poster with the shark on it.
Mhm.
So when they see that point of view scrutin along the floor of the ocean, they're like, "That's that shark," But when we watch it 20 years later, we don't necessarily see the poster first. We just
Mhm.
watch a fun movie, and yeah, I consider Jaws a horror movie for sure. It's got lots of dead people in it.
That's all you
You
need.
meet Bruce and ends.
Yeah, yeah,
Really, any movie where you get eaten is probably going to fall into that horror
probably
category pretty easily.
probably
Yeah.
is. Yeah, yeah.
So, what scares you?
What scares me? I never realized this until I was talking to my mother about 5 years ago. She says, she had me when she was what, 15 or 16, I guess, and she still had her dog from when she was 12, a big German Shepherd. And she told me, I had no memory of this, but in my crib and wherever I was tucked, whatever corner, she would always come into that part of the house and see that dog looking over the edge of my crib and growling at me. And so
Ooh.
I guess I was a baby looking up where I expected a safe mother sheep to be and seeing a dog head. And because of that, I think because of that, I was always fascinated with werewolves. And I think
Mhm.
that's why I finally wrote Mongrels. So yeah, people with animal heads terrify me. So those commercials with those dogs that have suits, those just shake me to the core. I guess they've
I haven't
never been
seen
around.
that.
They're pretty terrifying.
Those humanoid dogs.
Yeah, yeah.
See, and I always associate that with like Sesame Street and the dogs that used to be on Sesame Street with the hands.
Yeah.
Where you're exposed to them first determines whether or not they're terrifying or educational.
It does, yeah.
Well, I know this is a little off of the topic of horror, but I wanted to touch on it because we are a pop culture classroom. And as I understand, you are writing for Marvel Comics now or soon. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's coming out in probably about 2 weeks here. Marvel Voices. They invited me to do a little one shot for them, and they said I could do whatever character I wanted, and I chose Silver Fox.
Okay, I'm not familiar with the character, so could you tell us just a little bit, give a plug for watchers?
She's native. She her and Wolverine lived together in a cabin right after his Weapon X days, I guess.
Okay.
I think it was right after. Yeah, and they had a happy idyllic time until Sabretooth entered the picture like he always does and messed everything up, and killed her. And so to tell a Silver Fox story, I had to go into the past. She's like a light mutant light, I guess. She has
Mhm.
she's like long lived and kind of heals better and stuff. So I went back to the end of the 19th century and told the story about her, which was really fun.
That's really exciting because now that I think about it, she was a character in Wolverine Origins, the movie.
Yeah, I think
Really, her death just kind of propels Wolverine's story on, so you don't get a lot about who she is or her identity. So you get to kind of give her voice outside of just how she impacts Wolverine.
exactly. Yeah, I didn't want her to be just a propulsive agent for his narrative. I wanted her to have her own arc.
And what exactly is Marvel Voices?
It's a little anthology. Me, Rebecca Roanhorse, and Darcy Little Badger are all doing native characters. And Marvel Voices, I think it's the second installment. And there'll probably be more installments too, I would guess. But it's Marvel. It's Marvel trying to correct some of the not allowing certain people into the comics industry that's been going on for a long time.
That's very cool.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. It's neat to get a call from Marvel.
Yeah, right. So they contacted you.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome.
What does
I'd
that
be like,
call
I've
look like?
peaked.
I just think that that's the type of call that I would hang up. Like, who is this? Oh, it is Marvel. Oh, okay. We can do that.
That was my very first story that ever got accepted in 1995, I guess it was. I was in Denton, Texas, and somebody called to accept a story I'd submitted to Black Warrior Review, and I picked it up, and they said, "We like this story, we want it." And I was like, "Is this you, Rob?" And I thought it was one of my friends. And the whole call, I kept saying, "Is this you? Is this you?" And they were getting kind of tired of that. They finally convinced me it was really Black Warrior, and I'm like, "Wow, I sold my first story." And actually, I didn't even think about this. That was also for $150, with that contest I won. But and then I had it was a landline. It had a spiral cable on it, and I hung that phone up. And while I was holding it there, it rang under my hand, and I thought, "Oh, here's the punchline," So I picked it back up so they could tell me they were joking me, and it was the emergency room back where I grew up. And they said my mother had just had a head-on collision right in front of the emergency room, and they wheeled a gurney out and wheeled her back in, and I hung up the phone. I went out on my little apartment balcony and looked at the moon, and I thought, this is the weirdest moment ever. Everything's starting and things might be ending, but my mom was okay, but it was a weird moment.
Talk about emotional whiplash.
Yeah.
And I would guess some emotional confusion too, because how do you kind of process everything that's going on to know where you're at?
Yeah, no, it was
wow.
Weird. It was weird. But I have Marvel Voices coming out, and also I have a graphic novel memorial ride coming out with University of New Mexico Press. That'll be mid-October.
What's the pitch on that one?
It's a soldier returns from the sandbox, and he is supposed to sell his father's Harley to get a little cash, and he accidentally runs afoul of some people robbing a drugstore, and that turns into a big cross-country chase.
Cool. Wow. And who's publishing that one?
University of New Mexico Press.
Okay, got it.
Working with a really good artist, Mariah Wolf Lopez. She's really good. She likes to draw werewolves, but I didn't give her any werewolves to draw in this one.
So the graphic novel adaptation of Mongrels coming soon?
I've done one of the little stories. It's been published around as a little 10-pager, but yeah, who knows? Who knows what'll happen?
That would be crazy exciting. Just if you're wondering if anybody would want to read it, the answer is yes. Yeah. Also, too, your latest is Mannequins, correct? I wanted to have a chance to talk about that a little bit and just the ungodly horror of mannequins that you really bring to life in a short novella.
Yeah, no, it was a ball. It was me writing from that like 17-year-old perspective, and that's pretty much my favorite default perspective to write from. One of my friends, man, probably 12 years ago, he told me, he said, "Hey," he said, he said, "Steven, you really have a knack for teenage angst." And I was like, "Yeah, oh, thanks, man. That's really nice." And I was walking home that night, and I realized, wait, he was insulting me. That's not a compliment.
No, you work with college students. Teenagers are exciting characters because you never know what they're gonna do. Their motivations are all over the place.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, and we all relate to teenage angst because we were all there at some point. And if
Yeah.
you can, it's not teenage angst that is whiny for the sake of being whiny. It's the real stories that you go, my goodness, I was that kid in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
I love when authors treat teens with respect and with
Mhm.
realism, like, because it's very easy to write down to the teen experience, but when authors can really like say, no, I respect what you're going through and can still write about it in a respectful way.
Yeah, no, I mean, 17-year-olds, they think they're smarter than everybody, but to tell you the truth, the 17-year-olds I've interacted with kind of are a lot smarter than me, you know? Yeah.
So, as we kind of move towards wrapping up, we have some Halloween questions that we want to ask
Yeah.
you. But first, because you do have a long bibliography,
Huh?
where would you recommend someone start? Where it's like if you're talking to a new horror reader, one of our listeners, where were you going to point them?
I think for a horror reader, I would probably point them to The Only Good Indians. I think that's a pretty, I mean, it's not really a sampler platter like a story collection, I guess, but I don't know. It shows somebody. I think if you read The Only Good Indians, you're gonna know whether you want to read more of me or not.
As someone who is reading it currently, I'm really excited to see where it goes because I am not quite through Lewis's story, but from the beginning and where the book starts to Lewis's story, I'm very intrigued to see how it keeps going.
Thank you, thank you.
So yeah, definitely recommend that one to pick up. And the audiobook's great. The reading of it's really good.
And that's a Blackfeet guy reading a Blackfeet story. I think that's the first time that's happened.
I did wonder about that as I was listening. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think on the audio version, I do the dedication and the acknowledgments with like they let me record it.
There you go, your little cameo appearance.
Yeah.
And to your website, and it's demontheory.net. Is that right?
Mhm.
There is so much on there to look at and see and kind of get to know more about you, not just as an author, but overall.
Yeah, it's just a big junk pile that I throw everything in.
I mean, I
reading-
was laughing because one of the things at the top of it was like 6 egg limit or something like that.
I
It was like
immediately
at the
went
top
to
of
the
the website.
crafts tab. I was like, crafts? What is happening here? I really enjoyed it. It was,
Thank you.
Oh, it apparently changes because now that I've refreshed the page, it says once ate 11
Yeah,
swordfish
I
steaks.
did. I'm really proud of that. I was at a buffet and I ate all those swordfish steaks. That was my first time to ever have swordfish steaks. And that egg one is like, you remember in Cool Hand Luke, he eats like 50 boiled eggs or something,
Mhm.
And I couldn't do that. Not even close.
Oh man, Tajan, if we had realized this, we could have just gone to different sites on his webpage and used these little sentence starters as conversation pieces. Like conventionality belongs to yesterday. I love that.
That's from Greece, man.
And then we know we need to do a follow-up panel. We've laid the groundwork. We know about your background and your inspirations. Now we're just going to have a really quick bullet line by line. Give us context for each statement.
Yeah, that'd be a blast.
Okay, well, we have some Halloween questions that we've been asking all of our guests today. Matt and I have already disagreed on several of these to the point where we may no longer be able to be friends outside.
Candy corn. She likes candy corn.
Candy corn is a delicious once a year treat that everyone should have. It's so
Once a lifetime, because then you realize you don't want that anymore.
So we're going to ask you the same, and we'll provide some more context on how we see some of these. And it's just give you a couple scenarios, and you give it back to us. So, do you prefer the kind of spooky vibe or a straight, scary, terrifying vibe?
Probably spooky.
That would have been my guess from your writing, yeah, or what I've read of it.
More spooky, okay.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of media and the things that you are attracted to, do you like zombies, like a good zombie movie, or more of the ghostly, haunting genre?
If between those two, I will usually go with a zombie because ghost stories tend to be slow, like they're atmospheric, and I prefer
Mhm.
put on the wall, you know?
The Haunting of Bly Manor. I'm calling you out. You're slow.
It's taking too long. So the one ghost story that I was able to think of that I've really enjoyed is Crimson Peak, but
Yeah.
it's
Mm.
almost more of a zombie-esque in that the use of
Yeah.
the practical effects and some of the characters. It's not quite as haunting as some of the other.
You know, if you like Crimson Peak, you might like Sylvia Marina Garcia's Mexican Gothic. It was a really big book. It's been a really big book this year. It's got similar like tone and build and stuff.
And what was it again?
Mexican Gothic, Sylvia Marina
Mexican Gothic.
Garcia.
Okay. I did. I love that one. So now I'm excited there are more. Okay, in terms of zombies though, do you have a favorite zombie?
Yeah. Oh, you mean a favorite? Yeah, my favorite zombie is Tarman from Return of the Living Dead in 1985, I guess. I love Tarman. But my favorite type of zombie is probably the Rager, the fast one, you know,
Mm.
Mm,
the runners, because in a hallway, I would much rather face a Romero zombie, a shuffler, than I would
mhm.
a zombie, you know. But
Mhm.
long term, over like a decade of trying to live in the world, I would probably rather face the Ragers because the slow zombies, they're slow, but they always win, you know?
Mhm.
Mm. Yep.
Mhm.
It's that, even going back into that kind of inevitability of something coming that you cannot stop.
Yeah.
You
It
just have
follows.
the terror of watching it.
Yeah. And you know, the Romero zombie stories, the takeaway from not just his movies, but the Romero type of zombies, the takeaway from all those movies is always we're the monsters, you know?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Okay. How about, do you have a favorite horror movie, game, book, comic?
Yeah. My favorite horror movie is Scream. I watch that over and over and over. I
The
just
first one?
watched it the other night. Yeah, I love Scream forever and always. My favorite horror comic is probably Nailbiter. I love Nailbiter.
Oh, I
Um,
don't know that one.
yeah, it's over the top violent. It's a town that keeps producing slashers, you know, and I love that.
Mm.
I love that idea. Let's see, TV show. My favorite horror TV show has probably been Harper's Island. I think it's from 2008. It's a slasher series.
Mhm.
Maybe it went 12 episodes, maybe 13, something like that. Favorite horror novel. That's the hard one. Oh wow. I guess
This is always the question. What scares a horror writer
uh,
when they're reading?
I think my favorite horror novel is probably going to be The Shining by Stephen King.
Mm.
I love that.
I just introduced that. I have a sister who's 19 and really starting to want to get into reading, more adult books,
Mhm.
and she's reading The Shining right now and just can't stop talking about it.
Yeah.
She's seen the movies
Mhm.
and she's becoming one of those, let me tell you how the movie did it wrong.
Mm.
And
Yep.
that's where it's at. So she's not a huge Kubrick fan at the moment because she feels it didn't do it justice.
Yeah.
I
All right.
need to read those still. We recently watched Doctor Sleep, which I enjoyed quite a
Mm.
bit, and so got to get to the books.
I want to watch the long version of Doctor Sleep. I haven't queued that up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I watched, because we were renting it, and it was like, okay, I could get one version or the other, and we did the normal one. And I'm like, no, I really want to watch the extended one because there's certain things that I can tell. I'm like,
Yeah.
man, if there was a little bit more explanation here.
Yeah.
I had no idea there were two. So one's just more in depth.
It's the director's cut.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think The Shining, the novel, I think the reason it is so good is because it was such a personal horror to Stephen King at the time. He was dealing with all those issues that Jack Torrance is dealing with. I mean, not with being a raging person with an axe, but they amplify things on the page, of course. But I think that's why that novel hits like it does, is because it was personal, and that's the way you write good horror. Is you write what you're terrified of.
Mm.
All right, Halloween costumes. Steven, do you have a favorite costume that you've ever
Um,
put together?
yeah, it probably is just as simple as Jason Voorhees. I've been Jason Voorhees for a lot of.
That's what one of our previous guests from Scout Comics said as well. Yeah.
Yeah, you feel really good in that mask.
Mhm.
Although this was probably back in 2006 or 05. I was on Halloween. I was supposed to do a book event at a Barnes and Noble or somewhere, and so I put on my mask. I was going to a Halloween thing, so I just wore my Jason costume to the event. I was going to go from the event to the thing I was doing, and so I get to the bookstore, and I've got my mask and my plastic machete, and I'm walking around, and nobody's talking to me. And I finally realize I get like, you can't see real well in that mask, and I realize that the employees are all like forming like a half moon around me, and I realize they're going to tackle me.
Oh my gosh.
And I take my mask off, and I'm like, no, I'm supposed to be here. And they said, who are you? And I was at the wrong bookstore. Was the problem.
Oh no.
I always love every year at Denver Pop Culture Con, we have, a Jason and then always a Michael Myers, and they're always so committed in their costume, in the way that they don't talk. I love watching the Michael Myers cosplayers because they always get real close to people without them realizing it, and then they're standing behind them all quiet. And I think sometimes those are the best
Yeah,
costumes to wear.
I agree. I love those. Yeah.
Well, last question then. Favorite Halloween treat? We've already talked about how amazing candy corn is, so we know as a stream that candy corn is delicious.
I've got it here. My favorite. I don't know if you can see it. These are
Sixlets.
Yeah.
Wow. I haven't had sixlets in ages.
I know they're so good. Well, the trick is, I'm kind of allergic to chocolate, so I can't. So I have to eat things that are labeled as chocolatey. Like that's how you say it when you don't have actual chocolate, And so things that are chocolatey, I can eat the heck out of. And sixlets, I love to just down these tubes one after another.
Oh my gosh, that's excellent. I think that's definitely the best answer to that question so far today.
I've always loved them too because you can just pull it straight from the wrapper as you're doing it, and there's something so satisfying about that entire process.
Totally is, yeah. Yeah, you feel like you found like a workaround or something,
All right. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for being here with us today. I hope the rest of your day of many panels goes well and that it is everything that is supposed to be. This has been a fantastic conversation. We have a lot coming up, though. Stick with us for PopSCREAM. We are going to, in our next panel, be diving into the wonders of makeup and cosplay and doing a demo where we're going to show you how to do Halloween makeup with the stuff that you have around the house that is going to be medical mask friendly so that you can go out in and amongst the world. We're going to be doing an anime character. Matt, remind me which anime character we're doing.
I want to say it's Sasuke from Naruto.
We'll agree and say that's what it is. We're also doing a zombie and a princess, and it's going to be watch along. So make sure that you're with us. You get to watch Matt and I make fools of ourselves as we attempt to follow along and do the makeup. So it promises to be really exciting. Then later this afternoon, we're going to be talking with podcaster Ken Reed from the TV Guidance Counselor podcast about the horrifying 90s and what we were watching and what was in the TV guide the week of Halloween 1990 before wrapping our day up with a streaming of scary games and the AV Club cast. So they're going to be scaring each other playing games.
No.
If you missed the panels earlier, those are all available on our YouTube page, YouTube/PopSCREAM, and we're streaming across all of the Denver
PopSCREAM.
Did I say Scream?
Yeah, it all blends together.
It's PopSCREAM, but today we're doing PopSCREAM, and you can imagine some of the confusion that is caused over the last couple days. But no, we're everywhere. Make sure that you're liking, commenting, and subscribing. And thank you, everyone, again, for being here. Happy Halloween.
Yep. Thank you so much, Stephen.
Thanks for
Bye,
having me.
all.